Welcome to Theology of Money, the podcast where faith and finance meet. I'm Daniel Catone. I'm joined by my co-hosts here today, Christopher Bloom, Pia de Saleni, and Chris Owens. Together, we explore how Catholic theology, scripture, and tradition can shape the way we think about money, wealth, and stewardship. Our goal is to dig beneath the headlines today and the market trends to uncover how the gospel should inform the choices we make with the resources entrusted to us. We're going to have a pretty detailed discussion today where we're going to look at our church's holy guidance in the way in which we select our investments. And I hope you can tune in and listen carefully, because we're going to be a little more detailed than usual on the actual application of theology to our investment decisions. So thank you for joining us today, and thanks to my co-host for joining. Welcome, everybody.
Hey.
Good to be with you.
Good to be here. So as all of you know, and I'm not sure if our viewers and listeners know, in 2021, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops got together and debated and discussed and created a document called the 2021 Investment Guidelines, Socially Responsible Investment Guidelines. And these guidelines are really quite robust. They span a huge section of the American economy in examining what can be invested in, what cannot be invested in. The document addresses how the application, how we're to apply theology in the execution of what's called the common good to benefit everyone with our investment and financial decisions, something that we can share together as people. The guidelines have been widely regarded, I think, internationally as sort of the standard. And a lot of institutions, or a lot of Catholic institutions across the world, are sort of taking the USCCB guidelines and making them their own and developing their own guidelines. And so I think this is one example of many where we can really congratulate our bishops on having created something really groundbreaking and important, but also built on the bedrock of Catholic social teaching, which has a multi-thousand-year pedigree. And so I'd like to use this document as something for us to explore together as co-hosts. And I also encourage our listeners and viewers to just go online and read the document. It's free, available for everybody. Just search 2021 Investment Guidelines, USCCB, and you'll find it as a PDF to read. It's just a great way to start your investment life, or maybe restart it in the life of our Lord. So with that, I'm going to open it up for discussion a little bit. I know, Pia, you've been really involved in this document, I think, in its creation, and are involved in its revisions potentially that are coming down the line. And you and I have worked together on the research side on this. And I think you have a lot of insights here. But I'd like to start off by just hearing your opinion of the document and the work that the USCCB has done on it.
So thanks, Daniel. I think it's a good document. It's a good start. I was not involved in any iteration of it. I have been asked some questions for the new version that's coming out. So it's a really interesting document because they state clearly that this document is for their own investments, right? So I think that's important because it's a good model for institutional investors. Individual investors might, in goodwill, disagree on certain things. I think it's also important to understand that it's a good reference tool, but it's not the only tool. And so, for example, at IWP, we started screening out opioids long before the bishops did. We currently screen out Mifepristone as an abortifacient, even though that type of medicine wasn't used in 2021, widely used. And we screen out Grindr and hookup apps, right? These type of things were not theirs, but with the mind of the church, all of the teaching that we have, we are very confident in these choices that we've made. And I think the document does have to be updated. I would like it to, in my world, I would like it to say, we're making available to you the tool that we have for our investments. That criteria is probably going to be pretty similar for other institutional investors. Individual retail investors, again, might agree to disagree and do so in perfect charity and be completely in line with the church. It's just some of these holdings are not a good look for an institutional investor. And it's different for a retail investor.
I hear you. This is very interesting because you mentioned a couple technologies that really didn't exist or really weren't investable in 2021, like the hookup apps and the particular drug, how do you say it?
Mifepristone.
Mifepristone. The abortion drug wasn't widely used. And I think what the church has done is by leaning on the concept of the common good and the general principles of Catholic social teaching, it's sort of immunized itself from being too dependent upon technological change in its policies. Because if they were to be too doctrinaire on technology specific issues and exclusion, then they wouldn't be able to evolve the document very easily into fitting the changes that are happening, especially over the last few years. Does that make sense, Pia?
Yes,
Okay.
100%.
So, it's interesting because if I were to talk to you, Professor Bloom, having taken classes from you at the Augustine Institute, I think probably the most common phrase, if you were to do a word cloud of all the phrases you've ever said, I think common good would be a really big part of that word cloud. So I think you have a lot to say on that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what Pia just said on the question of the common good with our investment decisions in a practical execution kind of manner.
Yeah, there's an awful lot there, Dan, and it's hard to know exactly where to begin. I guess for me, the church has sort of landed in its public pronouncements since the council with an account of the common good that we see reproduced in the Catechism about a sort of sum total of societal arrangements that conduces to people and groups like families finding their true end, right? So that means the life of virtues here below for the sake of the beatific vision, right? The life of eternal happiness in heaven, right? So that is to say that the church is sort of recognizing that the political arrangement that we find in a nation state or in an individual state like Missouri, where I live, right, isn't really susceptible of being directly taught by the church, right? But rather only sort of being influenced by the church, and so the church is sort of coming to terms with that by basically saying your job at the state level, whatever that level is, right, is to sort of not get in the way of people pursuing their true good. And so this is why the church for the last 75 years has been making a very big deal about religious liberty, right? But and then also concentrating on things like clean water and healthcare and so on and so forth, right? Because these are what allow the more thick instantiations of the common good that we see in families and parishes and other kinds of communal groupings below the level of the state, right? Where people are really living lives of shared virtue, right? Virtue in common. So anyway, there's that, and I think that so far as that relates to investment, sort of my own personal sort of disposition here is looking out, whether it's at the 30 in the Dow Jones or the 500 in the S&P, and just sort of asking the basic question: okay, does this enormous entity help to make the world an easier place to pursue virtue at the level of the individual and the family and the parish and the school and so forth? Or does this entity make it harder to pursue virtue in those areas?
Sorry, Chris, the entity that you're talking about is the corporation?
Yeah, the corporation.
Right. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, right.
My mind was going about 3 different directions. Thank you.
No, right, exactly. So, whether it's the big 30 in the Dow or 500 in the S&P or whatever, right? But these are enormous things, right? They're huge things. Entity, right? There's your Tom Cruise artificial intelligence thing.
We're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, that's right. So, does this thing as it manifests itself in society, right? Does it make it easier or harder for people to live a life of virtue, right? And so, an obvious limit case here, where you're just going to say, no, right? It would be something like Playboy Enterprises, okay, right? Like, no, that joint stock corporation that you can own shares in, and derive profit from in one way or another, that does not make the world an easier place to be virtuous. So I don't want to have any part in it, right? So
No,
that's sort of the initial approach.
I like your initial approach. In fact, I think you're echoing Pope Francis on this. I was looking at his quote from him that we find in the USCCB document: "A technological and economic development which does not leave in its wake a better world and an integrally higher quality of life cannot be considered progress." And so when you're examining these companies for investment, and we're going to actually talk about a couple of them today, I think what you've outlined is this sort of broad concept of, does this allow human beings to become, like, don't get in the way of people being people, like fully alive human beings, right? And that's sort of like the first question, which can exclude entire industries, like you were saying, like pornography and things. And what I also thought was interesting is it also excludes investing in tobacco, which I was very surprised by this, because there's a long history of tobacco use by the saints, by popes, frankly, the snuff and all that kind of stuff, and all kinds of things. But we can't invest in that. And I think Chris Owens, I don't know if you smoke cigars.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. I
yeah,
do. And so, are we sinning? Is this a problem? We can't
no.
invest in these things. I mean, this seems like a problem.
Well, I really loved what Pia had to say right there at the beginning, and I want to echo that. In the first place, this is probably one of the best documents to come out of the USCCB
Hmm.
in the last decade. Really, I mean, we're halfway through the 20s now, but yeah, in the last decade, if you've been church watching and kind of looking for direction and guidance from the bishops, kind of corporately. This is a really profound document, because in the first place, it says, if we're going to be a good witness, if we're going to be a good witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ, then we have to, in the first instance, look at ourselves, right, and make sure that we are beyond reproach, right, and so, as Pia said, this document in the first instance is really to guide how the U.S. bishops corporately, and then uh, as guidance to individual dioceses and other Catholic organizations, how to think about responsible investing. And but as Pia said, with the retail investor, this might be a really good guideline for institutional investors to just adopt wholesale. What we're really talking about is the movement to the virtue of prudence in either the individual or in the person charged with care over an institution, right? And prudence is about the application of knowledge to the particulars in front of us, right? And so it would be really wrong to imagine that we need to update this document every time a new technology app that's odious gets produced. What really we're being given principles, and then we're being called as lay Catholics in the world, and then also as institutional executives and leaders to take those principles and apply them prudently to the circumstances in which we find. So for instance, I can think of a number of I'm not going to call them Catholic cigar companies or Catholic beer companies, but there's certainly privately held for-profit companies that that take their Catholic identity very seriously and want to promote that in and through their good quality cigars or good quality beer or other liquors. And in a certain sense, this is following the monastic way, right? You look at the Abbey ales and the Trappists, who for centuries have brewed beer as a means of bringing in revenue. And one of my favorites, of course, is Beer Inertia, which is made by the monks in Norcia, Italy, where I'm an oblate. Yeah, so I don't think that we can kind of take these these questions of preference or of things that are morally neutral or morally good in a particular objective use, but maybe aren't good for individuals to consume, right?
Well,
And
the
and
if I could just jump
from the
in,
institutional perspective, it's maybe in that space where I'm working with alcoholics who are really trying to live the church's teachings and strive towards a virtuous life. It wouldn't be a good thing necessarily for an institution to support an alcohol company, right?
Yeah, perhaps not. Yeah, Pia, you were going to say there too.
yeah, I just want to jump in. I think so. The USCCB guidelines flag cigarettes because tobacco because nicotine, and it's highly addictive because it's highly So your big publicly traded companies that are engaged in this, they are making a ton of money off of a highly addictive substance, and it's the same with alcohol. And if you look at who buys their products,
Mhm.
most of them are addicted or highly dependent on them. If you're talking about a private boutique business, they're probably not selling to the addict per se, or else it's going to be a very well funded addict. Um, but their business model is usually not based on this component of on a customer base that's driven by addiction. Whereas the publicly traded companies, I mean, the people that buy beer in Norcia, they like beer. I mean, I buy it for my dad. I send it to him every so often. These are not alcoholics. They're not raging alcoholics. I mean, maybe some of them are. I don't know, but
Theology Money, sponsored by.
that's not. Whereas your bigger companies, they are based. Their business model is based on a customer basis that tends to be highly addictive. And I forget the exact stats, but when I read up on this, it was really, really, I mean, just mind-boggling to see what percentage of alcohol is consumed is purchased by people who drink tons of
Interesting.
bottles in one day. And so again, now you're relying on addiction as your business model.
Okay, that's interesting. So it seems like the distinction that we're making here on these products is the question of addiction. And where do we draw the line, and where does the USCCB draw the line in terms of the way we could apply these standards to our own individual decisions for investment selection? Obviously, tobacco, nicotine, they say is like more addictive than cocaine. I mean, it's like super addictive drug. You have alcohol, which obviously has addictive properties to it and physically addictive. It can be, withdrawals for alcoholics and all that type of stuff is evidence of that. But if you look at other companies like Doritos and Oreos and products like that, I think there's some pretty good evidence that they have engineered these products in such a way that maybe it doesn't rise to the level of addiction of nicotine or alcohol, but it's certainly meant to influence the will to you want more Oreos. As I'm going to be the world's biggest hypocrite. I will eat an entire box of Oreos if it's in front of me. It's my doom. I'll tell you, much more than cigars. But where do we draw the line? I mean, Professor Bloom, do you see the distinction there of addiction like Pia is talking about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the question arises because of tobacco, right? What Pia has said about alcoholics driving the market for mostly light beer, actually. That is simply the case, and it's been true for half a century. So this is just totally wide out in the open. Tobacco is a little bit trickier, right? Because the adverse health consequences of tobacco use have been, let's face it, right? They've been trumpeted to the skies, right? I think a reasonable person might say they've been possibly exaggerated a little bit, right? There's been a kind of crusade against tobacco that's a little bit hard to understand. And it's clear that it's possible to use tobacco in ways that don't lead quickly to lung cancer, right? So it's an interesting case here where the prohibition seems to have something to do with the scale and the marketing, right? Because when you're at that enormous scale, right, then it matters an awful lot if you gain or lose 0.5% of your market share, right? And so the investment in the marketing is extraordinary. And as we know, marketing is culture forming, right? And so I wonder if the USCCB's sort of instinct here is, by and large, aggressive marketing about how beautiful and suave are people who smoke cigarettes is generally bad for the culture, and it drags a whole lot of people down a bad path that for some will lead to lung cancer, right? So we're safer just without it. Right?
Yeah.
So
And I
The
want to start.
business
I
model,
appreciate.
the business
Sorry.
model actually depends on a certain percentage of the population being addicted to this substance. So I think that, to my mind, is the biggest issue, is that this company cannot thrive without a certain percentage of addicts. And this, we're not talking about a company that provides treatment centers and they rely on addicts. That's different, all right? We're talking about a company that sells a product that literally relies on addiction. Again, we're also talking about, we have to remember that these guidelines are for the USCCB's own investments. And we're talking about public equities. We're not talking about, I would like it if that were stronger and clearer in the next iteration of the document. Because
Yes.
I think there can be some private investments that you've all brought up here, alcohol, tobacco, that I don't think are morally problematic.
It's a complex question, and one of the things that we say at Arimathea is not only do we touch people's money, we are really touching their souls. And I started you all with this kind of, I don't want to say lighter. It's lighter than the next topic, I promise. This lighter topic of alcohol and tobacco. And I want to get into.
Can I raise one last thing on the
please.
alcohol tobacco?
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
I lived a life of an expat for a decade in Europe, across the continent, and again, back to prudence, right? I'm not holding the Italian chain smoker as like a model of virtue. Hear me rightly, okay? But the way that Europeans in general approach alcohol is very different than the American alcohol situation. I hesitate to call it a problem,
You're
but
Southern
maybe that's
Europeans, not the Northern Europeans.
well,
Very different.
yeah, but like that a teenager in America would be sneaking alcohol and binge drinking the Edward 40 Hands or whatever the game might be.
Right.
That was the rage in college. That's very different than the youth that are culturally used to being passed a glass of wine at the dinner table, and it, I'm not going to say there's not a problem, it's a different sort of problem, right? And in the United States, because there's some particular cultural issues related to alcohol, and that, as Pia was, and I'd love to see, by the way, as a follow-up, because that's just fascinating, some of the data around that. But like that industry is kind of, that's built into the model for business success. That's a particular application of prudence, right? I still think even at the level of the United States bishops, to the cultural context in this time and in this place, that they need to be conscientious of.
You bring up a really interesting point, Chris, because the country-specific needs for investment guidelines are real, because the way in which Americans consume beer is different than the way Bavarians consume beer, for example. And so as the USCCB guidelines become a standard that's adopted, it is largely being adopted by Europeans too. That has to be taken into account. And I think there's a prudential application question there that I think you brought up, and I think is very wise. And so I was saying this is a little bit lighter than the next topic from the USCCB. I want to talk about the morning after pill and Plan B. And one of the things that I have learned through my work at Arimathea on these topics is how little knowledge there is in the actual, and I'm using major air quotes for anybody who's just listening to this, the medicine of abortion, the way in which Plan B operates versus the way in which, I'm never going to say it, mifepristone?
Mifepristone.
Yes, there you go. So, the
The
way
M
in
word.
which, the M word, the way these drugs operate on the body, and then the church's distinctions on, when can Plan B be used licitly? Can you invest in a company that sells Plan B? This is a really interesting topic to me, for a couple of reasons. The first is we had a big debate within Arimathea of whether or not we could own a very specific business. Costco actually is the company, because we found out that they were selling Plan B through their prescriptions of their pharmacy. I actually called a Costco, I think it was in Boulder, Colorado, to confirm that, pretending in a sense to be able to buy it. And they said yes. And at first we thought, gosh, how could we possibly invest in this business that is generating revenue from Plan B? And I'm going to turn it to Pia, because Pia, you have an expertise on this topic, and we've talked about over time. What is the difference between Plan B and the M word drug?
Okay, so Plan B is used within a few days of sexual activity, ostensibly to prevent conception, but it does not. What it does is it hardens the walls of the uterus so that if there is conception, the embryo cannot attach. There is a legitimate use case for this in the situation of rape. The problem is that I don't know of any protocols, any major hospital protocols that follow this. You could test a woman to see where she's at in her cycle just by looking at her hormone levels. And so that would show you one of three things. She's totally in the infertile period, no worries, right? So her body doesn't need this heavy dose of hormones. The second case is she probably is in her fertile period and conception has occurred and the horse is out of the gate, all right? And the third case is she is within the window in which she could possibly be, she's heading into that fertile period, or she's heading into that fertile period. We really need a doctor on here. But where it would actually, taking the drug would be, in the case of rape, legitimate to prevent conception, right? So this is unfortunately, I don't think any hospitals have these protocols set up. The other challenge is that the drug is used overwhelmingly by women who have engaged in consensual sex. So there is one narrow legitimate use case for it, and most of the cases of it are abusive because they were used by people engaged in consensual sex who didn't take whatever precaution. I mean, I'm sorry, but if you don't want to have a child, there are lots of different contraceptives that can be used that will not result in the death of a human being.
But are you saying that Plan B can actually kill an unborn child? Is that
because it forces the hardening of the uterus,
right?
And so then the embryo can't attach, so it results in the killing of an embryo.
I see. It's horrible. Before we go to you, I was going to ask a quick question to Pia on that. Does the USCCB guidelines permit investing in a company that sells Plan B?
It does not give specifics. It says the language that the document uses is you can't invest in companies that support abortion. So that also is very unclear. At IWP, we screen out companies according to products and services, and we engage on behaviors. So if a company owns a hospital that does abortions, that's a fail. We don't recommend investing in that company, right? If a company gives money to Planned Parenthood, we say that's an engagement because that's a behavior. We can get the company to change that.
Very interesting. And Chris, you were going to ask a question or make a comment.
Yeah, I just we're talking fast here, so I just wanted to clarify because I don't want to give the misimpression. Pia, I believe what you had said there was that that there are many other avenues for somebody who doesn't want to conceive to prevent conception. rather than procuring an abortion after the fact. I think I don't want to give the wrong impression. You weren't saying, oh yes, it's morally okay to use contraceptions. You were simply saying that for people that are already engaged in bad acts, like there's an even worse act, which is abortion.
Yeah, go ahead and clarify that, Pia, just so we don't
Sure. I
have
think
any
Benedict
miscommunication.
in one of his interviews called it the awakening of the, he took the example of the male prostitute who uses condoms, and he says it's an awakening of conscience, right? I mean, I 150% support the church's teachings on sexuality and marriage. What I would like to see is a broader conversation in our culture where we can be honest about the fact that sex generally leads to children. And if you don't want to have children, there are steps. I don't agree with the extramarital thing that you're doing, all right? But there are steps that can be taken to keep children from coming into the picture. And Thomas Aquinas actually has his article on fidelity, on fornication, is so beautiful because he says, when I was reading that, I remember the first time I'm reading that. And so I'm expecting some hellfire and brimstone response, and he says, no, because the child that could be conceived out of such a union would not have the stability that it deserves for its education, its formation, all that stuff. I mean, that's beautiful, totally profound. And in some ways, I mean, he's way ahead of where we're just beginning to get to in terms of trauma influences at a young age, which can occur whether your parents are married or not and so forth. But it's such a beautiful response. And so I would just like it if we could have a broader conversation in the culture about the fact that sex can lead to children, and you should be prepared for that. And it's like the language, I think is it in Person and Community, where Wojtyla says that in the marital act, in the sexual act, the man should be thinking, I could become a father. The woman should be thinking, I could become a mother. That's thinking that is not happening.
Yeah, and I'd say that the sexual act is inherently marital, right? Fair
enough.
And so, the other side of that also, again, on this awakening of conscience and taking account responsibility for one's actions. In the mystery of providence, children have been conceived throughout the millennia out of wedlock, right? It seems to like a particular opportunity for a generation that won't grow up, that won't learn how to adult, that a mystery of providence, while not at all condoning the act itself, that if a child is conceived, that's in a certain sense a kick in the pants to get married, to grow up, to get a job, to have responsibility, and on that other side, having that pastoral care for those who find themselves in the married way and yet not yet married, that we have to create a culture that supports that also.
Well,
one of the things
Chris,
I love.
Sorry, go ahead. One thing. Oh, I was going to say this. It seems from what you're saying and what Pia is saying is that whether it be St. Thomas Aquinas or Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, or Pope Leo hasn't written on this subject yet, the grounding of these questions is two things: the common good and human dignity. And so whatever we're discussing in terms of the way in which we choose our investments, when it gets down to the nitty gritty of these theological questions of, men and women coming together and procreation of children, St. Thomas Aquinas is basically pointing to the child and saying, this is a great good, this child. And that's because of their dignity, because Imago Dei. And then the church is kind of taking this on itself and then saying, yes, it's all about the common good. And so anything, and Professor Bloom, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, anything that contradicts the common good in some sort of negative fashion, you should not participate in. It's going to be sinful. Is there an example where we can be doing something that is contrary to the common good and still be living a life of virtue in Christ? I mean, Professor Bloom, is there any possibility of that?
the simple answer would be to say no.
Sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I mean, what you might have an interesting perspective on this, because what Pia is saying is, from the USCCB documents and from the perspective of IWP, who I respect greatly as one of the best research organizations in the world on theology and finance, if not the best, they engage on the behaviors of the company, and they'll exclude the company based upon its product and its actual function, right? Do you look at it the same way? Like, if you look at Costco and they're selling Plan B, would you own Costco? And if not, why not?
Yeah, that's simple. No, I won't own Costco now that I know that they sell Plan B. And that's because even if there happens to be some tiny sliver of the use of Plan B that might be understood as licit, the typical use of it is to kill to kill a child. And I have to assume that the pharmacy sells the thing because there's some kind of profit margin. And I have to assume that Costco corporate allows the sale of the thing because they care about that tiny little sliver of profit margin. And so I can't have a part of that.
Well, and it's also interesting because it's taken so soon after intimacy, after physical intimacy, that there's no way that the woman can know whether she's pregnant or not. And I mean, just do the numbers. Most of the time, she's probably not pregnant, right? So I think it's also like, again, why are we selling something that's very easily available to women that is just like this huge ingestion of hormones that the body's not ready for? I really would support the I would really support the morning after pill being sold in a much more limited context with, again, I think it does require a prescription. I don't think it's right that it be sold without a prescription.
So this is over the counter? I didn't even know that. I mean,
I'm pretty sure that it is.
Okay. So, we've been talking about Plan B and Costco, and we're going to talk about Costco a little bit more here.
Yes, it's over the counter.
Yeah, it's over the counter. Okay, well, that's very interesting. The other thing I would say is not only so Plan B, the FDA says that Plan B is not an abortifacient. So and correct me if I'm wrong, theologians, but or we need medical doctors to chime in here. But the idea is that the FDA says before the child is implanted in the womb of its mother, if that child is disposed of and destroyed in advance of that, that's not considered an abortion by the FDA. And so if a drug prevents the implantation of the child into its rightful place in its mother's womb, it's not an abortifacient, I guess. I mean, is that
because
the
they're
position?
saying that's not the direct intent. They're saying, which I
The
would disagree with.
FDA, a direct intent, like they to talk about that is crazy to me.
Well, but I think their language would be all this does is hardens the lining of the uterus.
No big deal.
No big deal. So that it's as if it's some sort of an unintended consequence. Yet
Yeah.
the very reason that people use this is because they don't want implantation to occur.
Okay. So I'm gonna put you on the hot seat just a little bit, Pia. Chris says he won't own Costco because of this fact. What is IWP saying about owning Costco in light of the USCCB guidelines and just general conscience here?
It is, again, the USCCB guidelines do allow for Plan B. So we're following that.
Okay. So it sounds like you're a little hesitant.
I am.
Yeah. Okay. So perhaps
Fully,
in the
I
next
am.
iteration, you and I are both working. I'm coming at it from the artificial intelligence perspective. You're looking at it from a different perspective for the new guidelines from the USCCB. I would love to work with you on that to get the USCCB to come out and say, no, we will not invest in companies that sell Plan B. I think that would be a huge win for Catholicism and babies all across the United States, wouldn't you say?
I would. And again, the legitimate use can be covered by other people, by other providers.
Yes.
Even if you required a prescription for it, we would be much further along. I mean, that would be an improvement, is requiring a prescription. But that's hard. I mean, you would need further regulations that the person has to establish that this was a rape. And I will say that to use the term common good, to return to that idea, I think it would be good and we have to have an environment in which it is safe for a woman to say that she's been raped. If it is not safe for a woman to say that she's been raped, we have an even bigger problem, which needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and we need to prosecute these men.
Yep.
I really appreciate what you said earlier, Christopher, about the common good, and I'm glad Pia brought it back there. One thing I was trying to look up, and I just haven't read it in so long. Maybe one of you recall. Pope John Paul II, addressed the problem of contraception properly, not things that are called contraception like Plan B. He looked at that as a social phenomenon that would lead to the breakdown of marriage and the family, and many other things that we've seen come to arise in our society today. By the separation of the purpose, the end of marriage, the primary end of sexual acts from its use, right? And I remember more than a decade ago, but like many folks seeing that as a prophetic kind of.
Well, that was Paul VI in Humanae Vitae.
Okay, yes. I could you refresh on the specific there?
I mean, everything that you said, that's what Paul VI said. And we know that John Paul II was involved in the writing of Humanae Vitae, defending Humanae Vitae. So I think that his mind would be of the same. And I mean, looking at everything that he wrote, particularly in Love and Responsibility and Person and Community, I mean, what you're saying, Paul VI is the first one to kind of put it out there publicly, or at least in the most authoritative way. But John Paul II was, the thoughts are the same. So
I've heard he's instrumental in getting that document through, and then by providence becomes our Holy Father, which was incredible. On this specific issue of Plan B, I mean, there's another drug that is discussed in concept in the USCCB guidelines, and that's the abortion drug, the drug that I keep saying that starts with an M.
Mifepristone.
Mifepristone. And it's a very different thing than Plan B. And just for the edification of our listeners and viewers, whereas the Plan B drug, I think it affects the hormones of the mother to cause this particular hardening of the walls of the womb. It's different though than mifepristone. Pia, can you discuss how it's a little bit different there? That'd be helpful.
Yeah. So first of all, it's taken. Usually within the first trimester. If I recall correctly, the guidelines are about 13 weeks. It might be high. I'm seeing different things as I do a quick search. I think the cutoff might actually be earlier, 11 weeks. I'm not sure, but it's within the first part of the first trimester, right? So it's a 2-pill regimen, mifepristone and mifepristone, and I think it was 2021. Recently, the FDA released reduced this. I'm using we need a doctor on here. Changed the language of the requirements such that it didn't require to be dispensed in person in a doctor's office. So suddenly we moved into this space of telemed, where a woman can go make an appointment with a medical provider, perhaps even a nurse practitioner, and uploads an ultrasound, but there's no verification of it. Is it her ultrasound, or did she pull this off from ChatGPT or somewhere, right? There's no physical examination, so there's no knowledge as to whether or not the pregnancy, the age of the pregnancy or the stages of pregnancy cannot be verified. It cannot be verified whether or not she has an ectopic pregnancy, which can be life-threatening. Furthermore, the FDA's own guidelines indicate very high risk. And I'm going to throw some numbers out there. They may or may not be right. I would encourage our listeners just to go and check the FDA's guidelines. But I think it's about 12% of the women who take the abortion pill regimen end up in the emergency room. And of those, I think about 25% require surgical intervention. All of the testimony that we've had from women who have taken it, it's not so the marketing on this is, well, it's just like a heavy period. It's not. It's like a hemorrhaging. It's awful. And so I think it's a very dangerous drug. And in addition to the fact that it's it does terminate a pregnancy. What's interesting is, so I used to be on the board of Heartbeat International. It's a global network of pregnancy help centers. They took over abortion, abortion reversal something. Which was actually started here in San Diego. The regimen is progesterone. So a woman can actually take the first dose of this regimen. I've heard this testimony from so many women, and it's just, they say a feeling of darkness comes over this. I even heard a Russian woman giving her testimony, and it was being translated into English. And the first words she said were, it was a feeling of darkness. So anybody in the psychology space, I mean, I would love it if you went after that, because that's fascinating. And then they start Googling, they start searching. And so they're looking for abortion reversal, or abortion APR, abortion pill reversal. So Heartbeat took that on because Dr. Delgado, the doctor who came up with that regimen here in San Diego, he needed to hand it off to someone that could really run this, right? And so it's progesterone, and actually it can be, I think over 60%. And again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, despite the fact that I'm staring at a screen. I think about more than 60% of those regimens can actually be corrected or overturned with progesterone, resulting in the birth of a healthy baby. And so the plus side of this is, for years, those of us that are pro-life, we've said, oh, if only we could be in the surgical room where the abortion is taking place. Well, now we can be in that space because it's happening outside of the surgical room. But the drugs themselves, this is a very serious thing. And the FDA's own guidelines state these outcomes. So when I interacted with CVS, for example, I said, where on your FAQ do you include the guidelines that the warnings that the FDA has, right? Where? And I just got a shrug. All they said was, well, we have an FAQ. It's like, great, but it doesn't really inform women about the risks.
Well, they don't want the women to know the truth of how the drug works. They don't want the women to know the truth of what's growing inside of them, and they don't want the women to know what the alternatives are if they were to take that path.
But here's the irony, right? CVS and Walgreens, Rite Aid, all these big pharmacies, they've been generating losses year after year after year, right? They're not working. And so they're selling a pill or pills which make the patient literally a one transaction patient, and that's it. Because how many trips?
Patients.
Both patients, but the unborn child.
Yes.
How many times? All of us. How many times do we go to a pharmacy or a drugstore in our lives? How many times? So instead of looking at the potential there of this unborn child, if that child is born, they will be a lifelong customer of pharmacies, drugstores, whatever you want to call it.
It's almost like they only care about the short-term profits.
Or something worse.
Perhaps something worse. And so you would say, with IDPP's research, you would not own CVS, for example.
We failed them because, and they're also advertising as abortion providers.
That's it's
There's
horrific.
no doubt.
So, when you're saying something real quick, but before we go to something worse, I just want to say a comment that you made, Pia, about the one of the side effects of Mifepristone being kind of a hemorrhaging event. I think it is so interesting that we read the story of the gospel where the woman who is hemorrhaging touches the hem of our Lord and is cured. There is an obvious connection between what women are being put through now by these drug companies and these pharmaceutical businesses and the drug dispensaries, all this kind of stuff, and that story, and how much Christ loves that woman, and how every single one of these women that are going through these difficult challenges in their life and then making this choice to abort their child is loved infinitely by Christ, and that each one of them is the woman that could touch the hem of our Lord. And we have to help these women know that. I mean, they have to know they're loved. They have to know that there is a way forward. There is a hem that they can touch. And I think that's just a beautiful way of thinking about it, maybe. But Dr. Chris, you were saying about
the something worse. Pia mentioned on it. If short-term gains or long-term losses really aren't intrinsic, maybe to CVS, I don't want to say CVS, but for example, a pharmacy's decision about making these drugs widely available, right? If the most fundamental aspect of the market of exchange and profit and goods and services isn't a primary motivator, if it's the something worse, two things come to mind. One is we started talking about socially responsible investing, which is not only about the exchange in act, but it's about something more broad about our intentions and about our values on why we're choosing to engage in the market in a particular way. It seems like, Pia, and I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on this, but it seems like the implication and probably the reality is it's almost common sense to say it based on the last couple of years in the society, but it seems like there are other reasons and other goals that corporations have for virtue, whether you call it virtue signaling or supporting particular movements in society that aren't necessarily profit driven, but are about
promotion of evil. Let's just
promotion
call
of
it what it
evil.
is. It's promotion of
Yeah.
evil, and it's a terrible investment decision. Because if you're investing in a company, whether it be CVS or Costco or whoever, the reason that you're investing in that company is for returns. You're trying to have a positive return on your investment. And these companies that are pushing evil, there's no profit there. There's no money to be made in evil.
But
And
it's
so
their own
it's very
version of
strange.
social responsible guidelines.
Yeah,
right.
twisted.
That's kind of what I was getting. Whatever they consider socially responsible, that's their own social responsible guideline. So
I wish they thought through it so clearly. I don't know if they do.
So moving away from the product directly, right, to companies that maybe provide great coffee or other wonderful things, but support what they would refer to as social responsibility, but is in clear contradiction to the church's teachings. What is the line? Because it seems like at some point we totally remove ourselves from the market if we talk about sort of remote material cooperation with evil. So where is this line when so many companies are engaging in their own version of social responsibility that's clearly evil? Where is the line for the Catholic that we can still participate in the market while not condoning their evil social agenda?
Well, where is the line, Professor Bloom? Where's the line for you? Because you I was going to pick on you because you're being quiet right now. So you must have a line.
Yeah. Oh, I just go with Altum. I use the Altum Explorer, and they ding companies for these things. And what's available to me as a private individual in the website altum-fi. Is it .com? I think it might be.
I think so.
So I encourage our listeners to learn about what Borja Barragan and his colleagues at Altum are doing, which is wonderful work. I don't, as a private individual using the free app, I don't have access to the data that's behind, right? And so that's okay because life is short, and I'm a tiny little family investor. So I personally am not in the advocacy game, right? Because my tiny little share of some company isn't going to be enough to, make the management listen to me as a shareholder. So I don't think about.
I have to interrupt you there, Chris.
Go ahead,
do.
Pia. What? Go ahead, Pia.
I mean, to sponsor a shareholder resolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to have owned $2,500 worth of stock for 3 years. It's either 10 or 15,000 for 2 years or 25,000 for 1 year, continuously, right? You can't rebalance and so forth. So we had tremendous success with a major company. The shareholder had owned 25,000 over 1 year, and we ended up dropping the resolution, and the company made the change. This is in the space of corporate match gifts, and their foundation. This company's foundation is now accepting corporate match gifts for religious 501c3s, We're not going public yet because we're doing some additional work that will implicate the broader issue. But that's not a heck of a lot of ownership. And
Well, I do appreciate that point. Dan asked me what I do personally, so I was
I just
only
don't want you to
testifying to
underestimate. But I
that.
don't want you to underestimate. That's all
And
I'm saying.
I do appreciate that, but my life is short, right? And as it happens in our retirement accounts, we do not have a single position that's $25,000, right? So, just for us, like it's like I recognize the importance of the advocacy work. I don't feel called to do it. Okay. And so in answer to Dan's question, what I do is I just listen to Borja's, scorecard, right? And I just work with that.
It's a fair point. I mean, I also don't want you to underestimate the effect you can have on these companies. And one of the things that's really awesome about our work with IWP is our ability to make an advocacy. I don't know, it's not activist investing. I know it's not that, Pia, but to actually try to get these companies to change is it's just hugely valuable. And I know the company you're talking about, Pia, I won't burst that bubble either. But the fact that somebody with $25,000 or $2,500 or whatever was able to get one of the largest companies in the world that's ever existed to start matching donations for, frankly, Catholic charities and Catholic institutions too, is just a huge win. And one of the things that we're working on at Arimathea is the aggregation of this power, where all of our investors, however they're investing with us, we can bring that weight to bear in concert with what IWP is doing to get these institutions to change and really come closer to Christ. So while you personally may not be called to that, I certainly am professionally called to that. And so is Pia. And so,
Exactly.
folks working on your behalf can get these institutions to change their behavior. And it brings up a very specific example. We have some friends, Robert Netzley and our friends over at Inspire Investing. They've done some great work in building products to help Christians, particularly mostly on the Protestant side, but they do a little bit on the Catholic side too, to help people think about investing with values in mind and then actually executing that in some way according to their particular prescription. And I was really impressed by something that I saw from them, and kind of a press release. And there was a quote that said, "Costco has decided not to sell the abortion drug Mifepristone. Inspire Investing, along with other faith-based coalition partners, has engaged with Costco for several years as part of a broader shareholder advocacy effort." So is this a change? I mean, has Costco suddenly gone from not selling Mifepristone or selling it to now not selling it? Is this a change, Pia? I mean,
No,
what award should we be giving these folks for this achievement?
Well, we engaged with Costco early on 2 years ago and again this year, and they sent us an email that said, we're not selling it. So Costco has never sold it. We're not selling it because we're concerned about the Comstock Act. So that's an act.
And the Comstock Act is like mailing abortion drugs in the mail.
Part of it is, it dates back to the late 1800s, and it precludes the mailing of abortifacients. So I was impressed. They knew what the Comstock Act was. Like, all right. And then they said, this is not a need that we see that fits our customer base. And they said, there are other doctors that can provide this. So I was really happy with that. So over at Inspire, they were not happy with that. And so they did a letter that they had lots of people sign on to it. We did not sign on to it because we see our role not as activists, but as stewards, and we help our clients to steward their assets according to Christian and Catholic values. So, and also we're very careful. We don't want to interfere with a company's running of its business if they are in fact doing, operating in good principle. So we didn't sign on to that letter. And Walmart as well has not sold Mifepristone and has said that they won't. So
it's not really a change then.
What I don't understand is if, and maybe Inspire got a commitment from them that said that they won't. And so that would be great.
That's good. Great. I mean, progress is progress here.
Lots of people have engaged with these companies to say, this, we're concerned about this and so forth. So I think Inspire did take the lead, particularly in its having the letter that they had people sign. And so that was tremendous. And I think we do just, particularly at the institutional level, I love that the retail people are more passionate than a lot of the institutions. But at the retail level, there is so much Catholic and Christian money that's invested in these companies that as shareholders, those institutions should be having a bigger voice. And in the voting of proxies is very important. Proxies, we're generally not voting on the moral issues per se. We're voting on governance. But that's when we start to vote on boards of, who's sitting on the board of directors, the decision makers, what is this company? What is the purpose of this company, and how is it planning to make money? Do we agree with that?
And Pia, wouldn't you say too, I mean, the church in her wisdom has called us to that engagement.
Yes.
It's not just enough for an investor to avoid companies that do whatever things that you don't agree with. But if you do own a company that is doing something that's contrary to the gospel, I think we are called by the church to help them change their behavior, just as we would call it for anybody. I mean, if you have the ability in some way to impact that. At the same time, I want to leave everybody with kind of this message of hope here. There's tens of millions of Catholic investors in the United States, maybe 30, 40, 50 million investors in the United States who, go to church on Sundays and have, read these documents and think about these things. Imagine the power that we have right now kind of being held back. It's like this bridled stallion that we have, the ability to influence these companies. And for so long, the left and the folks that are in, not just the left, but folks on the left that are opposed to the gospel have been pushing these different ideas with very small minorities of people signing up with them on these really some of the worst ideas you can think of. And then the companies go along with it. Why? Because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. They don't want to deal with all this kind of stuff anyways. But imagine if 5, 10, 20 million Catholics band together and sign something or do an advocacy or some type of engagement with a company to get them to change their behavior. How much more will they respond to those investors and consumers, than the 6 crazy people protesting outside their window trying to get some, lunacy passed?
This is a great point. On our last podcast episode, one of the claims about why it's not moral to invest in the market was precisely that it's so big and so out of our control, and therefore our voice is so removed from the decision making and the ability to affect change that we shouldn't engage. I'm probably oversimplifying, but that was basically the argument we discussed on the last podcast, and we disagreed with it at the time. But I feel like this we've seen very clearly, and it's very inspiring. The conversation we've just had that shows the fallacy of that.
Yeah, and the reality is, folks like IWP, folks like Borja out in Spain, folks like Inspire, Eventide, Ave Maria, these are not recommendations by any of their things, but I'll say all of these people are pulling in the same direction. And the more we can collectivize and organize Catholicism and Christianity towards positive change in society through the economic activities that we make, through the decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis, the more we can bring the gospel to the world. We can live out the gospel in our economic decisions. And I would challenge each person listening and watching this show to ask yourself honestly, are you living the gospel out with your investment choices? And if the answer is yes, kudos to you. If the answer is yes, but I want to do more, there's lots of resources at your disposal. All of us, are available by a simple Google search. So, with that, I want to say to my co-hosts, we've covered some very difficult and sensitive topics today. And I just want to tell you, thank you all for reflecting the dignity that our Lord Jesus Christ gives to each individual, and recognizing, whether it be the women that are facing these difficult choices, the children that are victims, the women that are victims, that are really preyed upon by American corporations, to be able to recognize their dignity and to know that each one of them is loved by Jesus Christ. Each one of us is loved by Jesus Christ and is called to something so much greater than what the world is trying to sell us. And so with that, I'd say, God bless you all. Thank you for being on Theology of Money. I'm Daniel Catone, your host, Aristotle Arimathea, and look forward to seeing you next time.